I'm Donn, and as it happens, about 20 years ago this past weekend, my husband Raj and I moved to the lakes area. We were vacationing here, as maybe a lot of people do, and saw a house on the market, actually two, but one of them didn't have a for sale sign pamphlet on it, and so we took the one from the other and made that contact. And ironically, the house that we bought was owned by a realtor, and we've joked with him about that later. He could have had a double commission. But anyhow, we bought this house, and we bought it to move into what I had always dreamed of would be a small town that I could walk and do certain things. And we're in Lakeshore, and while it's a small town, and actually, although small, is the first largest city in Cass County, it wasn't exactly what I had dreamed of. It wasn't my Eden. That aside, after we bought the house, I decided to go to grad school, and I got my MSW. And we ended up moving full-time a few years later. I worked for the county, Crow Wing County, as a social worker, and later on as a mental health therapist, specializing in grief for a mental health clinic. And as I reflect on my time here, as well as wherever I've been, and I'm originally from Louisiana, but after I graduated college in '69 from Xavier University, which is the only primarily Black Catholic university in the United States, my first job was with, often call it the little soap company, Procter & Gamble. And I was in market research, the first Black person they hired. And that was in the days when our parents did these taste testings, if you will, or blind studies, and we would deliver the cake mix, and then we'd go back and get it and talk to these people. But I was the first Black person they hired in that area. And then after I left that market research, I then went into buying or purchasing for P&G, again, one of the first, and then into traditional retail, again, one of the first. And it was always the first female or the first Black female or the first Black person. But I never really thought of it in that regard until I moved to Minnesota, northern Minnesota. And yes, I got a job with Crow Wing County, the first Black social worker. And actually, when I talked to my former supervisor a couple of years ago, she confirmed that to this date, maybe I have been the only Black social worker. So when I was invited to do my reflection, I thought of that and how my life is different here versus in the Twin Cities. In the Twin Cities, even though I was usually the first or the only or whatever it was, and was married to a European, if you will, there were always other people that were like me someplace else in close proximity. And I wasn't always as visible as I am now. Obviously, I'm visible, but I was one of many. I could be forgotten. And the thing that became very apparent here for me is that who I am makes me very memorable. And while I want to be memorable for the things that I do, not always because of what I look like, as, oh yeah, that Black woman or whatever. And all of that being said, I've been treated kindly. So the only Black social worker at Crow Wing County, the first minority therapist at the clinic. And through all of this, I can say professionally, I've never felt like a second-class citizen. Maybe at the county because I work for the county. And yes, I was in protection where I was removing the children, but I always felt respected. And even as a therapist, maybe because I'm hearing the stories, and people are there for help. Ironically, the part that have given me a little angst is in the larger community where my visibility becomes a discomfort for me at times. If I go into a small boutique, and everything here is pretty small, if I don't buy, the perception is that I'm being watched if I don't buy anything. And I would never feel that way if I was in the Twin Cities. Or, yes, I remember you, or whatever it is. And again, while that might be good, it gets to be tiring after a while. And so it's the both and. You want to know that it's a good thing that you're doing, and yet sometimes you just want to have your own private space. So there are times when I'm invited to be a part of an organization. And yet at the same time, I'm one of those that if I belong to an organization, I refer to my own description as I don't want to just be a member of the pew saying present. I want to take an active role, okay? And I do, whatever I'm part of. But that being said, initially when I'm invited to be part of an organization, I sometimes wonder, am I being invited so they can check the box or because of my skill set? And while I believe and feel that I have a skill set, that is still in the back of my mind. Was that their first reason for asking me? Is it because they can check the box? So I can't go, I don't know how people feel, why they ask me, and ultimately I have to not prove myself, but I demonstrate that I am worthy of whatever position I may have. But two incidents that I have reflected on, that I wrote about, and it happened in my own community. One of them was I got a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and there was a workman from perhaps Spectrum or whatever. It was Spectrum, and he was asking for an address, and we live in a dead-end street community, a cul-de-sac, and so we know everybody, at least I tend to know everybody. And he's asking for an address, and I'm not the address. And then he asks me, do I live here? And I'm thinking, I answer the door. I don't have a scarf on my head. I don't have a mop in my hand. Would he have asked that to someone who didn't look like me? Okay, so that was one of the things at my house. The other one was also at my house. When we go away for a few weeks in the winter, we always call my husband makes a note on the website that we're gone away and the police can check, et cetera, et cetera. And we know the police in Lakeshore, at least they know what I look like. And so now we're back home 2 weeks. And I'm walking and I see the sheriff's car, whatever patrol car it is, and I wave at the person. I'm thinking it is the sheriff. And the vehicle goes around, and by the time I'm walking up to my driveway, I feel and sense and now see the police car. And is the sheriff, who's a different person, not the person that I know, and he asks me, do you live here? And I'm thinking, I just waved at you. Why would you ask me if I live here? So then I go to the door and my white husband comes out and I say to the police, he was asking me, and so the police officer explains, well, your house was under watch. True. We've been back 2 weeks. If we're under watch, why didn't you take it off? So when I'm thinking, when some of these hesitations that I have, am I reading it wrong? Or is it my perception? Did they not mean, perhaps they didn't mean any harm, but would they have asked that to someone who had waved at the police officer in the second case? Or if I were blonde and I opened the door to the worker? So those are my only two recent interactions that kind of make me say, yes, how I look matters. But aside from that, I feel good about where we live. We're going to continue to live where we do. I will continue to be as active as I choose to be, and understanding that not everyone will embrace me the way I perhaps feel to be embraced, and to know that I will never be invisible because I'm just visibly different.